Well, welcome everyone. My name is Jody Roberts. I'm part of Art and Climate Action, which is a collective of arts professionals and artists in the Bay Area. As always, we appreciate everyone joining for April's community meeting, which is organized with Galleries Commit in New York, and now also with Gallery Climate Coalition in LA. So we are expanding. Quick reminder that these meetings are recorded and they will be up on our YouTube channel shortly in case you want to share them with colleagues who will find this information relevant and informative, or if you just want to return to it, you can always find it there. At our last community meeting, we talked about steps that small art organizations can take to improve their climate impact, noting that even exhibition systems that don't say have an HVAC system can make changes in their behaviors to conserve energy and reduce emissions in the process. But today we're really moving toward the other end of the spectrum. We're thrilled to have Joyce Lee here to talk about her work on sustainability with major museums and cultural organizations. Joyce is chair of the American Association of Museums Environment Climate Network and president of IndigoJLD Green Health. She has years of experience guiding large institutions as they move to improve their energy efficiency. And she brings to this conversation a really unique purview that spans the entirety of the country and includes different types of buildings that are used for very different programming initiatives. A question that Art and Climate Action gets all the time is, well, how much energy do museums even use? And we know in the broadest terms that the answer is a lot, but we're really thankful for Joyce for diving into the details with us. Without a doubt, learning more about the steps ambitious exhibition spaces are taking to improve their energy use and climate impact will direct us to solutions we can implement in our own workspaces right away. But before I turn things over to Joyce, just a little bit more about her past and current work. Prior to forming IndigoJLD Green Health, she was chief architect at the New York City Office of Management and Budget, leading green projects. Her past portfolio includes the U.S. Green Building Council, International Wellbeing Institute, Delos, Queens Botanical Gardens, Whitney Museum of Art, Museum of the American Revolution, and the Tech Museum. As chair of AAM Environment Climate Network, Joyce and her team have created accessible programming and tools on sustainability and climate action for thousands of members. She chaired the Sustainability Excellence Awards and supported the development of the Sustainable Exhibition Design and Construction Toolkit. So it's really an honor and a pleasure to have Joyce here, and thank you everyone for joining us. Why don't you go ahead, Joyce?
Well, thank you very much for having me. Hello to everyone, I think on different parts of the coast. So good afternoon and good morning. I am going to share my screen. Thank you, Jody, very much for the introduction. I know a few of you here, not everyone, but I also want to give credit to Mayor Bloomberg to start a number of us on this work. And because of that knowledge early on in preparing a sustainability blueprint for New York City, arrived at this juncture where having worked with institutions really gave me great pleasure to share what I have today. Great. So yes, I wanted to start after leaving New York. I was invited to become a trustee at an art museum in the Midwest because my husband's work moved the family there. It was the Grand Rapids Art Museum, which is one of the first LEED museums in the country. And it was very interesting to really have switched from seeing large museum with large budgets to a smaller museum and at a much closer scale, looking at how much energy, water, and other resources a museum actually use. And I will go and say that museums can be more intensive than a hospital, which usually makes a lot of my colleagues in the museum sector quite surprised. There's a number of museums that I work with, some closer than others. They are on different parts of the coast, as I say, different parts of the country. Some are quite new, as you can see, and some are fairly old. And as all of you know, many of them are both old and new. And this is where the challenge lies. So as a result of looking at the data from around the country, In 2017, my team have been able to pull together museums, buildings that have energy reporting. What we did was we divided them into different types that are most common, and having worked with AAM and its members, we divided that into art museum, history museums, and science museums. And all of you may know that they could be slightly different in operations and conservation standard. Not only do we look at the type of museums, we also look at different size category. Less than 100,000 square foot, the medium size being 100 to 400,000 square foot, and those that are really the big ones would be over 400,000 square foot. So this is what I like to share with you, that originally our assumption was that art museums and collections have the most stringent temperature and humidity requirement. No doubt you have covered that in the past, that all the art museums will be at the very top. And sometimes CEOs of museum would say, oh, only large museum would have the personnel to look at this aspect of museums operations. Is that really the case? So let me break it down for you. EUI is a measure of museum energy use and intensity. So think of that as a miles per gallon for cars. So of course, in cars, the lower the mileage, the better it is. Same with EUI, which is measured as kBTU per square foot in the lower left here. So we always know how big the museum is. And then this is the energy unit. And as I mentioned, so far, we do not have an Energy Star score for museums, but we have now, these measurements. How can we come to an average? We need more and more of these museums contributing data. The art museum, which is colored in blue here, the bars are at the very top, as we had expected, and at the bottom. So it is not a given that art museums are inherently inefficient. In fact, you can see a science museum being not very efficient or a history museum not being very efficient. Now, do size matter? What you see here is that the red circle is the small museums and the yellow being the medium size. Those green triangles are the big ones. So you can see that very high energy intensity at the very top and high intensity museums at the bottom. So in fact, size does not matter. And as we dug a little bit deeper into it, we realized that sometimes the small museums may not have the personnel or the climate control standards that sometimes would be necessary. And also think about the age of museums. In fact, older museums have better insulating quality, and newer museums, the R values of their buildings may not be as good. So there are a lot of factors in play, and that's what's really generated this rather confusing chart. And I like to share with you the next slide. It is not advancing, so let me try to, there we go. I like to share with you now we have a little bit more information in terms of geography. The federal government put this country's climate zone into several categories, including cold, which would be those in the Midwest. Let's say Grand Rapids Art Museum would be in the cold climate, as I mentioned. Marine would be those on the West Coast, San Francisco, all the way up to Seattle, for example. You have a number of these data points, and then mixed humids for those in New York and along the Atlantic seaboard would be mixed humid. It is not surprising that we see a lot on the East Coast because there are more cities requiring benchmarking and more cultural institutions in those cities. You can see on the right. What really surprised us a little bit was that in marine climate, which is relatively mild, the spread is almost as big as the cold climate and the mixed humid climate. Again, these are measured in EUI on the left, the kBTU per square foot. I would encourage all of you who may not know your museum's own carbon footprint, start asking the question, what is the EUI? because I'm going to share with you at the end of this presentation that it is going to be something quite useful going forward. So that was 2017. 2019, we did an update, our team. And fortunately, many more cities are now requiring that. I was just talking to Jody that in her area, San Francisco is definitely one of the early cities that require that, and so is New York City. We have more data points with almost 20 cities, and you can see that they're big and small. Fortunately, a lot of our cultural institutions and art museums are in cities, so we have a pretty good representation. What we did was that we also added hot dry, which is the Phoenix, Arizona, Los Angeles area, and then hot humid, which is Orlando and Austin, which collect data. We still need more hot humid like New Orleans and a few other places. It would be wonderful to see more representation to see what that spread really looks like. What does it tell us? It was a direct reinforcement of what we saw earlier in 2017. And I have to say, thank God we did it in 2019. You can imagine that these data points would not be very meaningful during COVID when the museum closed. So these are pretty much your year-round data. And again, I would encourage you to either talk to your facilities folks or even your COO or your CFO to ask, number one, how much you're spending on energy and what is your EUI. So armed with this data for the cultural sector, I wanted to share with you at a lateral analysis, how that again reinforce each other. So I'm currently in Philadelphia, which also had this law. And every year, the city releases a map of all the EUIs of the major buildings in the city. So they're different colors because they're different building types. And I would just share with you that all of our high-rise building, like the office, 50-story office building, are along Market Street. And you can see that they report and they're relatively small blue circles. The circles, the size of the circles is proportional to their EUI, which is how energy intensive they are. So you can walk into a major office building, hundreds of thousands of square foot, but their circles are not very big because of what? Their real estate owner are cost conscious. So they have been working over the last decade or so to cut down energy use intensity. And today we're seeing the results. But what has not really started as fast our cultural institutions. So I do not want to pinpoint particular institutions because those are institutions all around the cities, those 20 cities that you see. But it's just an example here in Philadelphia where we have a history science institution here that is huge near the Parkway. And then the Barnes Foundation, the Science Institute, Franklin, as well as the Philadelphia Museum of Art, which is our largest art museum. Look at the size of the circle. So again, it is not one particular museum that is so energy intensive. In fact, they all are. And I just wanted to share this with you that, data don't lie. And the fact that we now have the numbers, we can work on improving them. So you cannot improve what you don't measure. Speaking of the Philadelphia Art Museum, again, I like to share with you that because the city owns the facility of the museum, the local sustainability office work with the museum to come up with an energy reducing plan. So on the right-hand side, a lot of kind of technical jargon, but I would imagine that you all know museums, run on gas, run on steam, run on electricity. Do you need a big chiller to cool the museum space? Most likely, yes. So a lot of those systems could be old, could be not high performing. Each of them could use some level of upgrade. And as we got into the lighting, and you can imagine how many lights there are in a museum as big as the Philadelphia Art Museum. We also now have been able to tell our local museums that changing to LED lights is really great for your artwork because of the heat that lights emit for the collection is not always great, and it's not always even because they start from the top. So, if you have a painting, it is going to be affected unevenly, and that's not what conservators want. To the right is our mayor, whose office of sustainability really shepherded this project. And I really, give credit to the leaders to really push through this particular performance contract. And if you would like to have a little bit more help, we can talk offline to really drill into how the museum can benefit from this, because their energy bill was in the millions, and because of this project, they are able to bring it down in terms of dollar amount. But it's not just dollar amount that you're saving, it is the carbon emissions. Here, another museums in the Midwest, the Science Museum of Minnesota, has taken the lead on very early and had devised a net zero plan. So year over year, they have been reducing their carbon emissions. Here we translate that from energy use intensity, the EUI, to metric tons of carbons reduction. And here you can see that they are reducing almost 1,500 metric tons of carbon a year. And on the lower left-hand side, you can see that kind of steady diet of energy reduction leading to a net zero goal, which is very admirable. And during that time, when I had the Energy and Climate Committee, we actually did an estimate of what the museum sector would be emitting in terms of tons of carbon. And carbons can be measured many different ways, including embodied carbon and transportation carbons. Here we are only looking at the buildings emissions, and that's 12 million metric tons of carbon. So as a sector, I think we could all really contribute to make a difference. And that is the equivalent of 2.6 million cars on the road. I mean, the beauty is we are moving to electric vehicles, and museums can also offer a huge advantage. If you have people coming to your parking lot, for example, you can begin to look at that. And maybe overall between buildings and vehicles, scopes 1 and 2, carbon emissions, you can really make a big difference that way. So as chair of the Sustainability Excellence Awards jury, I am just going to highlight a few things that is related to our topic today. Very happy to do in another session of some of the real achievements of some of these institutions who submitted their application to be considered for this award. So I'm going to highlight 3 award-winning museums in different parts of the country to showcase what they have done and how it could inform our decision-making in the future. Spurlock Museum is on the University of Illinois campus. They benefit from the university president signing on a climate commitment. They have a vigorous system of analysis working with their energy office to do retro-commissioning. So as you can see on a campus, maybe your academic buildings means that you turn off the lights when the class is not in session, but museums work very differently. They not only look at their overhead lights that is changing to LEDs, they are looking at how to dismantle the case, change the lighting from other source to LED, and you can see the evenness and the brightness of the casing here that enhance the quality of viewing as well as the collection inside this relatively small museum, which is, I think, less than 50,000 square foot. And the way that they cobble up the funding was really great because they have the backup of the university and they were able to access an evolving loan fund. Here we have new construction in the Seattle area. The National Nordic Museum was able to build new, and using the Nordic tradition, the museum leadership is very committed to building a green museum. So the local architect and the owners begin looking at having something very green, and Seattle is also one of the cities that are moving forward with a net zero plan. Even though the museums cannot put in photovoltaic right there and then, when funding becomes available and prices go down, they would have the electrical infrastructure to put on photovoltaic. That's why you see number 7 at the dotted line. But another real innovation is something that all curators and conservators and museum staff can think about. Only do the relative humidity and temperature control in a very narrow range for your most important exhibit that require this kind of Class A occupancy to conserve the collection. If you have other materials that can withstand a wider range, put it in other areas. And definitely your circulation area does not have to have the 70 degrees and 50% relative humidity range, because as human, we adapt to much wider range. So you can see the red dotted line, the only enclosure, which is about 8,000 square foot out of 50,000 square foot of museum that had that HVAC very intensive need. I can go on and talk about their great work in biophilic design, which is making people feel better, and also a greening of the environment, as well as using native planting, which is very which is great in water conservation. But maybe we'll have to skip it to the next one. Back to the eastern part of the country, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Here we award them for their ability to influence the community. The museum has already bought green power because they had created LEED Platinum buildings and well-certified buildings over time, because the leadership has been very forward-looking. So as they understand the need to procure green electricity, the whole entire campus has no carbon footprint on their electricity side. They team up with a green power provider to offer the audience, which is the general public, a 1-year free museum membership if they would switch their household to green power. So as a result, by the time they submit their application, 5,500 households had switched to 100% green power. And for a city the size of Pittsburgh, that's quite significant. And I think the last time we talked, that number has increased to 6,300 households. And that carbon reduction is much bigger than the actual museum itself. And this is really where we see a cultural institution can really be a number one, a community anchor, and be a transforming factor in their own community and be lead by example. Last but not least, another exciting program going forward that almost everyone here can benefit from. It is a little bit more complicated in the sense that because it involves some tax incentives. In the past, when we talk about tax incentives, it was only available to for-profit companies. In the Biden administration, through the several congressional legislation that had been passed, now these energy efficiency tax deduction is available for nonprofit in the form that you can transfer that to your designers and your contractor. So anyone you have on the team that are for-profit can use to offset the energy efficiency dollars in their own tax return. So museums is in a great position to transfer this. And I would just say that starting this year, the Biden administration has also increased the tax deduction from previously $1.88 per square foot now to $5 per square foot. So just imagine you have a 50,000 square foot museum, for example, you can offer $250 worth of tax deduction to your design partners, to your contracting partners. And that's sizable and it can be shared. And depending on how often you have tapped into this 179D tax incentive, in the past it was a one-time deduction. Now you can access it multiple times. And then what is also very interesting is that in the past, it required a very high level of energy efficiency reduction, 50% or so. Now you can start at a more moderate level, a 25% reduction. And the calculation is also made a little simpler, meaning that you can use your EUI. So today, if you have 100 EUI, tomorrow you have 50 EUI, then you can claim your 50% reduction. But of course, it means some work within the museum with your leadership and the capital staff to actually carry out those projects. And it starts at 50 cents a square foot all the way to $1. But what is really the big kicker is the way that I guess you have heard about creating jobs. If you have a prevailing wage in the work that you do, as well as an apprenticeship program, which museums are usually very good at these because they're educational institution, you can maximize that to $5 a square foot. That lead to fairly sizable numbers. So this is a fairly complicated slide, and I'm sure no two institutions would think about it exactly the same way. But I just want to give you the tip of the iceberg of how exciting this is. And if you start planning today, you can probably get a lot of things done by 24, 25, 26. We don't know how long, this particular deduction at this generous level is necessarily going to last, but the idea is that there is a window and you do want to take advantage of the window. So Jody, I think I'm going to stop here. Is that a good idea?
That sounds good. Thank you so much for this incredible information. We have a couple of questions already. One from Danielle. Is the 179D, the provision part of the IRA bill, is that for just capital or commercial improvements, or is this something separate from the IRA?
Yes, that's very much part of that, parcel. There has been several, some of you remember the IIJA. So there have been a number of funding package aimed at energy efficiency improvement. And if you recall early on this administration, every government agency is required to send in, I think, a sustainability plan and resiliency plan. And as a result, Smithsonian has also put together a very comprehensive plan, which is, public on the internet as well. So I think it is a really good way of looking at this, that everybody can benefit from that. What you said about commercial earlier. Yes, I pointed out to you in the map that why would these small office building circles be happening there? Because the 179D had been offered to commercial buildings who file tax returns to benefit from that. So they started a little early, and that is why this development is so great that nonprofits can now participate and benefit.
And I just I'm going to put in the chat, excuse me, a couple of links that Joyce has sent. One is a video, a YouTube video, and the other an article that will be helpful for everyone here. Do you know the exact name of that Smithsonian plan, Joyce?
If you Google resiliency plan, Smithsonian and sustainability.gov, which I think is really a way to share with leadership that it has to be all in. So if the government wants to go green, it is everybody hands on deck. So it doesn't matter which agency, from defense to Smithsonian, everybody submits a plan. And I think the same way could be looked at from a museum sector, where your facilities, your back of the house, your front of the house, you can use this for education material. You can use this for visitor experience. We were just talking in New York the other day. If you are a Phipps conservatory offering this to your membership, isn't that a great visitor experience to go into the Phipps and then see that they use 100% green power and you convert it? You go home and you realize that you're doing the same thing. And then I think what they also do is they put barrels of oil of how much they save. And this is really powerful for I think, the general public and our audience at large.
Yeah. One more question. Oh, I'm sorry. Someone just put the Smithsonian plan in the chat so we can all have a look at it. Just want to leave a couple minutes. I know we're already at 10 o'clock, but if anyone has additional questions, you can either raise your hand or put them in the chat.
And we'll do a quick breakout for Climate Action 8x8 participants. I see a few of you on the call. So if you have any questions or if you just want to quickly check in. I might go ahead and launch that breakout room now. And so people who want to ask Joyce a question can stick around, and people who want to join me in the 8x8 participant breakout room can meet me there.
Yeah.
I would just add one word about, I think, the Smithsonian plan. What we greatly benefit from is, their resource and expertise in understanding flooding and storage and collections, right? Because they do have the personnel on that. It is a perennial problem, I think, for museums and galleries, how to protect. Because more or less the Smithsonian is in a very high water table area, they have spent a lot of time thinking about that. And I would just encourage, all of you who put your storage underground, start thinking about this, because with climate change, the water table either is going to get very low because people are sucking water out of underground, or get very high, none of which is really beneficial for collections underground. So behind me is the Louvre Museum. They are also near a river. They had made the early decision to have their storage building very far from the Seine River in Paris. So as you're thinking about your capital plan and the next generation of protecting your collection, think very hard about leakages, water seepage, and also the building envelope, because it's not just water, it's the particulate matter in the air that comes inside the building that is not great for your collection. So we just barely skimmed the surface, but thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you so much. This is incredibly helpful, both in terms of the technical information, but also hearing about how museums can play this public leading role and get the communities around them to start thinking and making changes as well. So thank you so much for being here, Joyce. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.